Hello friends of paper-bound knowledge transfer, and welcome to another book review on my channel. Today's book is quite special to me because the editor is one of the two authors of one of my favorite history books, Kaigun, which is the definitive book, I think, on the Imperial Japanese Navy. The book I'm reviewing today is The Japanese Navy in World War II, in the words of former Japanese naval officers, edited by David C. Evans. You notice that I said editor and edited by and not authored by David C. Evans. That is because the actual authors are, as the subtitles suggest, former Imperial Japanese officers who published after the war articles on different aspects of the Second World War in the Pacific in some magazines in the 1950s and 60s, and then those articles got put together into the first version of this book in 1969. And then there was an improved second version, second edition of this in 1986, and I now have the paperback version of that here in my hands. So let's now have a look at that book in detail. Let us first have a look at the structure and the content of the book. The book is made up of 17 main chapters, plus an introductory chapter, a chapter with short biographies of the contributors, as well as notes, sources, and so on. The introduction chapter, written by Raymond O'Connor, at first kind of sets the scene for the entire book by giving the reasons for the Pacific War and the main events. The following 16 chapters are then the main meat, the main part of the book. And those are all written by ex-Imperial Japanese naval officers. Those chapters are all structured along the same lines. So let's, for example, look at chapter number 6. The Struggle for Guadalcanal, written by Admiral Reizo Tanaka. He was an admiral in the Imperial Japanese Navy, and he commanded several reinforcements and resupply attempts of Guadalcanal. Just like the book itself and all the other chapters, that chapter started off by a short introduction, again written by Raymond O'Connor, in which he again sets the scene for that article by putting it in the right kind of frame, and maybe commenting in some chapters on some points that the author then makes in the chapter. After that, the entire chapter is only written by the Imperial Japanese officer in question, and there are no further comments in the text, only some footnotes, for example, on clarifying loss numbers or other details. The articles themselves are all quite different, just like their authors are different in style, in length, and in the kind of information that is presented, owing of course to the different kind of ranks that the authors held during the war, the different kinds of operations and points in time of those operations they took part in. The topics then range from single battles or operations like the Pearl Harbor attack to an overview over the entire length of a specific campaign like the Guadalcanal campaign that I've just mentioned, or also some specific aspects or an article on a specific aspect of the war. For example, the Imperial Japanese Navy's convoy system, which, spoiler alert, was pretty much non-existent for the majority of the war. All of those articles are interesting in my mind, or in their own right in my mind. What I found particularly interesting in several different chapters was that the Imperial Japanese Navy had an idea about the kind of losses that they inflicted on the Americans. It was often quite far removed from the actual losses that the Americans had sustained. An interesting point in my mind, and also interesting that the authors here in the 1950s and 60s sometimes apparently going off their old documents from the Navy, their Navy days, didn't know already or still didn't know the real loss numbers they had inflicted. Quite interesting. And as you can see, there are many on the picture, as you can see, there are many other points that I found interesting and informative in this book. Let's now have a look at the points that I thought were particularly or noteworthy, I don't know if you can say that, but let's stick with it, positive or negative in the book. I can make this short for the negative parts because there's nothing really that I didn't like about the book. So let's move on to the positive points that I thought are noteworthy about this book. The reason for the book's writing and my main positive point for this book is that we can see the other side of this war through this book. Because the language barrier with Japanese is very real. There's not a lot of stuff coming out of Japan that has been translated into English or other Western languages that we as Westerners can enjoy, and so this book shines a bright light on some aspects in the worlds of the people who lived through it, and that is very nice and very interesting, very cool about this book in my mind. Also, those articles were all, or majority, were written pretty close to the event, relatively, which of course should help in the clarity and the kind of veracity of the information involved in those articles. It can, it doesn't have to, but it can be good, and I think it is good. And also very cool, in my mind, is that many of these reports apparently were used for other books, for videos on YouTube, to illustrate them, to inform them. And now I've read the primary source for that, and I very much like that we, by buying this book, can have one of the apparently primary sources for many reports that we see in other books and TV series, YouTube videos, and so on. I also like about this book that it is commented, so that there is, or at least it's not really commented, but that there is an introduction to every chapter. So if there is a glaring error somewhere, then they tell you about it. So, or I would think maybe I just didn't notice all the glaring errors and that they weren't commented on. But I think there should be more like this. Like, for example, Guderian's, in English, Panzerlieder, in German, Erinnerung eines Soldaten. His biography is full of, let's say, incorrect points that he makes to make himself look better, or because he didn't know better, I don't know. I guess the former, doesn't matter. But there should be a commented version of that, to put it right, so that you can enjoy an influential book, but you still have the comments, and so you don't get the wrong idea. That's what I really like about this book. My final verdict on this book. In my mind, this book is a great addition to the library of everyone who is interested in the Second World War in the Pacific, and maybe so far has mainly been reading from Western sources about it. The language barrier, as I said, is very real with this topic. And so having the Japanese perspective is particularly interesting and invaluable in my mind. I would very much recommend buying this book. So after that recommendation to buy this book, I also have some further reading recommendations for you. My first one is the book that I've already mentioned at the beginning of this video, Kaigun, the history of the Imperial Japanese Navy between, I think, 1887 and 1941-ish. Very good book on the Imperial Japanese Navy, exhaustive, very interesting. I like it that much, or so much, that I've made my very first video on this channel about it, which I will link below, and you will see from this video that I've moved on a bit in terms of quality and brevity, so please don't be too harsh on that video. I have to redo it at some point. Another book that I can recommend on the Second World War in the Pacific is Fire in the Sky, or two other books. As for Fire in the Sky first, on the Air War in the South Pacific, written by Eric M. Bergerud, and Touched with Fire, which is the companion book dealing with the land war in the South Pacific, also by Eric M. Bergerud, and I've reviewed both those books in the past, and I will also link them in the description below. So that was my opinion on this book, my ideas, my comments on it. I would be very much interested to know what you think about this book, what you think maybe about my video, how I could improve, and maybe you have some reading recommendations for me. So far, have fun reading. Thank you for watching. Goodbye. See you next time.